But here's the truth. Intimacy with God is cultivated in the everyday moments. It's in the quiet time before your day begins. It's in the way you acknowledge him in your thoughts. It's in the simple prayers you whisper throughout the day. It's in how you choose to trust when worry knocks at your door. The more you make space for him, the more aware you become of his presence. And when you are aware of his presence, negativity loses its power. There is something powerful about consistency. When you spend time with God daily, you start to hear him more clearly. You recognize his voice, not just in dramatic moments, but in the small details of your life. You start seeing his hand in places you once overlooked. You develop an unshakable confidence, not because life gets easier, but because your spirit becomes anchored. Think about a tree with deep roots. No matter how strong the winds get, that tree remains standing because its strength is beneath the surface. It's not easily moved because it's connected to something deeper. That's what happens when you build daily intimacy with God. You stop being easily shaken. You stop reacting to every situation with fear. You stop being consumed by emotions that were never meant to lead you. But intimacy requires intentionality. It won't just happen. You have to make space for it. And that's the problem. Many of us want the results of intimacy without the investment. We want peace, but we don't prioritize his presence. We want joy, but we don't feed our spirit. We want clarity, but we don't take time to listen. And then we wonder why we feel disconnected. God is not distant. He's not waiting for you to perform. He's waiting for you to be present, to make room, to invite him into your everyday life, not just when things feel heavy. Because when he becomes a part of your daily life, you start to notice something. You change. Your reactions change. Your mindset shifts. What used to trigger anxiety now leads you to pray. What used to bring fear now builds your faith. What used to feel like rejection now looks like redirection. This is why daily intimacy with God is so important. It's not about checking a religious box. It's about positioning your heart. It's about aligning your perspective. It's about strengthening your spirit so that when negativity tries to creep in, you already have the tools to fight back. You don't have to scramble for peace. You are already walking in it. You don't have to search for strength. You are already filled with it. So ask yourself, how much space are you giving him in your daily life? Because God is always near, but intimacy is a choice. And when you choose him daily, everything about the way you move through life begins to change. Faith is not a feeling, it is a decision. It is the decision to believe beyond what you see, to trust beyond what you understand, and to move forward even when fear tries to hold you back. It is easy to talk about faith when life is smooth, but the real test of faith comes when negative emotions start whispering doubts into your heart. When fear says, what if it doesn't work out? When anxiety says, what if you're not enough? When discouragement says, maybe you should just quit. This is where the battle happens. And this is where faith must become more than words. It must become action. It is not enough to say, oh, I trust God. That trust has to show up in the way you think, the way you speak, and the way you move. Faith is not passive. It requires participation. If you believe God is your provider, then why do you let worry dictate your decisions? If you believe he is your defender, then why do you spend energy fighting battles that belong to him? If you believe he is guiding you, then why do you hesitate when he asks you to take a step? These are the moments when we have to choose. Will we act on faith, or will we let negative emotions take the lead? When fear comes, faith says, I will move anyway. When doubt rises, faith says, I will trust anyway. When everything in you wants to retreat, faith says, I will stand anyway. This is not about ignoring emotions. It is about not being ruled by them. Negative emotions will come, but they do not have to control you. You have the authority to choose differently, to respond differently, to shift your focus from what you feel to what you know. And this is why intimacy with God is key, because without it, faith becomes difficult to sustain. Without a real connection with God, fear will always seem louder. Doubt will always feel stronger. Anxiety will always feel more real than his promises. But when you are deeply connected to him, your confidence changes. You don't just hope he is with you, you know it. You don't just wish for peace, you walk in it. You don't just wonder if he is working. You trust that he already is. This is what it means to turn faith into strength. It means having a response for every negative emotion that tries to pull you away from the truth. It means being intentional about what you feed your spirit. If you feed yourself fear, you will live in fear. If you feed yourself doubt, you will always hesitate. But when you feed your spirit with truth, through prayer, through worship, through his word, you build a foundation that cannot be shaken. It also means being intentional about your actions. If faith without works is dead, then what are you doing with what you believe? Are you speaking life over your situation, or are you agreeing with fear? Are you stepping out on what God has told you, or are you waiting for conditions to feel comfortable? Are you living as someone who trusts God, or are you still holding on to control? Because faith is not just what you say, it is how you live. The more you practice this, the stronger you become. What once shook you won't shake you the same way. What once overwhelmed you won't have the same power. What once made you question everything will become an opportunity to declare, I know who my God is. And that is the goal. Not to never feel negative emotions, but to be so rooted in faith that those emotions no longer dictate your life. So today, make the decision to move in faith, the decision to trust God beyond what you feel, the decision to take action, to build intimacy, to strengthen your spirit so that when negativity comes, you don't shrink back, you rise up. Because faith is not just a belief, it is a choice. And that choice changes everything. There's a reason we struggle with negative feelings. It's not just because life is hard. It's not just because things don't go the way we expect. The real reason we find ourselves drowning in doubt, fear, or anxiety is because we've lost sight of who we are. We forget that we were never meant to carry life alone. Think about a time when you felt distant from someone you loved. Maybe it was a friend, a parent, or someone you trusted deeply. The distance created questions. Do they still care? Am I alone in this? That's exactly what happens when we become disconnected from God. We start to question. We start to overanalyze. We allow worry to sit in places where peace was meant to live. But intimacy with God changes everything. It's not about knowing about him. It's about knowing him. There's a difference between hearing someone talk about an incredible restaurant and actually sitting at the table, tasting the food for yourself. And that's what many of us do with God. We hear people talk about him. We show up at church. We say a few prayers when life feels overwhelming, but we never sit at the table. We never taste and see for ourselves. And this is why negative emotions take over. Because when you are disconnected from the source of your identity, you will always look for something else to define you. You will let fear tell you who you are. You will let anxiety control your decisions. You will let self-doubt convince you that you are not enough. But God never called you to live that way. He never called you to be ruled by emotions that were never meant to lead you. You see, intimacy with God is not a religious performance. It's a relationship. It's knowing that he is near even when you don't feel him. It's trusting that he is speaking even when you don't hear a loud voice. It's walking with the confidence that even when life seems uncertain, you are never walking alone. And that's where negative emotions begin to lose their grip. Because fear cannot coexist where faith resides. Anxiety cannot dominate where trust is present. So the real question is, what are you intimate with? What are you connected to? Because whatever you are most connected to will shape how you feel. If you are intimate with fear, it will dictate your decisions. If you are intimate with doubt, it will silence your dreams. But when you are intimate with God, you begin to move differently. You begin to think differently. You stop reacting to life from a place of panic and start responding from a place of peace. God desires a relationship with you, not just for the good days, but for every day. He wants to be your safe place, your source of wisdom, the foundation that keeps you steady when everything around you feels unsteady. And the more you draw close to Him, the more you realize that you were never meant to fight these battles alone. And so today, I want to ask you, where is your intimacy? Because the truth is, God has always been near. The question is, have you been close enough to hear Him? There's something powerful about perspective. The way you see a thing determines how you respond to it. Two people can walk through the same situation and come out with completely different experiences. Not because of what happened to them, but because of how they saw it. Think about a storm. One person sees the storm and panics. They assume the worst. They let fear take over. They brace themselves for destruction. But another person sees the same storm and prepares. They take shelter. They trust the process. They know that storms don't last forever. It's the same storm, but two completely different mindsets. And the same is true in life. Negative emotions are not just about what's happening around you. They are about what's happening inside you. The way you process your circumstances determines the weight they carry. If you see an obstacle as the end, you will sink into fear. If you see a delay as rejection, you will wrestle with doubt. If you see a setback as failure, you will struggle with discouragement. But when you have intimacy with God, your perspective shifts. You begin to see things differently. You stop seeing closed doors as punishment and start recognizing them as protection. You stop seeing challenges as roadblocks and start understanding that they are preparing you for what's next. The way you think shapes how you feel. That's why scripture says to renew your mind, because your thoughts set the atmosphere for your emotions. If you let every worry run unchecked, anxiety will rule you. If you entertain every lie the enemy whispers, insecurity will define you. But when your mind is anchored in God, peace becomes your default. Not because life is easy, but because your trust is not in life, it's in Him. There is a level of confidence that only comes from knowing who walks with you. It's the difference between a child walking alone at night and a child walking with a loving parent. When a child is alone, fear takes over. Every sound is a threat. Every shadow is something to be afraid of. But when that child is holding the hand of someone they trust, their whole posture changes. They don't need to have all the answers. They just need to know they are not alone. And that's what happens when you have intimacy with God. You stop letting your circumstances dictate your emotions because you know who is walking with you. You know that even in moments of uncertainty, God is still leading. Even when you don't have all the answers, He does. And when you trust that, you start responding to life differently. This doesn't mean you won't feel negative emotions. It means those emotions won't control you. You might feel fear, but you won't be led by it. You might feel discouraged, but you won't stay in it. You might face disappointment, but you won't lose hope. Because your confidence is not in what you see, it's in what you know. And you know that God is faithful. You know that He is working even when you don't see it yet. You know that no matter what life throws your way, you are never walking through it alone. So the next time negative emotions try to take over, pause, ask yourself, what am I focusing on? Because whatever has your focus has your emotions. If you focus on fear, you will feel fear. If you focus on uncertainty, you will feel unstable. But if you focus on God, you will feel peace, even when the situation is still unfolding, even when you don't have all the answers, even when things don't make sense yet. Because intimacy with God doesn't remove the storms, but it changes the way you go through them. And when you walk with Him, you walk differently. We often treat our relationship with God like a guest we visit rather than a home we live in. We come to Him when we need something, when we're in trouble, when life feels overwhelming. But intimacy isn't about moments of desperation. It's about daily connection. It's about what happens when no one is watching, when no crisis is forcing us to pray, when life is moving forward as usual. Imagine a friendship where you only talk to someone when you need a favor. Over time, that relationship loses depth. There's no real intimacy, just transactions. And that's what many of us do with God. We check in on Sundays, we pray when things get tough, but we don't build a rhythm of closeness. And then we wonder why we feel distant. We wonder why negative emotions overwhelm us so easily. We wonder why peace feels like something we experience only in glimpses rather than something we carry daily.